Where's Aziz? Oh, there
Aziz.
he is. I like when I always get like we always love when you show up. Okay, everybody should have a mic. Yes, thank you. So good afternoon. My name is Denise Savageau, and I am do serve on the board of the Connecticut League of Conservation Voters. This is our last panel, and as you can see up the slide, we're going to be talking about the intersection of environmental justice and affordable housing, because this keeps coming up in the legislative session, and we think it's really important that we're all talking about the same thing, because the intersection, as we've heard throughout the day, is something we can't talk about sustainability. We can't talk about resiliency. We can't talk about justice if we don't talk about these two things together. So I'm so excited to have the panelists here joining me. Again, I'm Denise Savageau, and I've been working in the environmental field for about 35 years, including with a local municipality, very familiar with land use regulations. I currently am the chair of the Connecticut Council on Soil and Water Conservation, so a lot of people know that I work in soil and water conservation. And I also serve on the Connecticut Energy and Environmental Justice Advisory Committee on the water subcommittee there. So I do a lot of work in environmental justice as well. So kind of where all of these come together. Joining me on the panel, State Representative Eleni Kavros DeGraw. She represents Kavros, excuse me. Eleni. Okay, Eleni. Eleni. Yep, Ryan's a penny. Good, thank you. Eleni Kavros DeGraw represents the 17th House District in Avon and Canton. She is the chairwoman of the Legislature's Planning and Development Committee and serves as a member of the Public Health and Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committees. We also have Aziz Dehkan, is that right? Is the executive director of the Connecticut Roundtable on Climate and Jobs, where he advocates for a just transition to renewable energy through the lens of environmental and social justice. And then rounding out our panel is Bryan Garcia. A lot of people know Bryan. Bryan is the president and the CEO of the Connecticut Green Bank, the nation's first state-level green bank to attract more private investment in green economy, creating clean energy jobs, lowering energy costs, and confronting climate change. So welcome to all the panelists. And I'm just going to start with a brief overview of what we're hoping to talk about today. We have about 30 minutes, so this is a big topic. I think someone said that energy was a big topic. Housing is a huge topic. So there are many challenges facing our legislators this session, and addressing housing crisis is one of them. Today, we've put together this panel to discuss how housing and environmental advocates can come together to find solutions to increase the supply of affordable housing that meet environmental justice standards. And in what Dr. Julian Agamon from Tufts, some folks may be following his work, but he's coined it as just sustainable housing. Again, this intersection of housing and social justice issues with environmental justice. First, we'll have a brief discussion of the interconnectedness of housing and social justice issues. What you see here, transportation, jobs, all of these public health, all of these social justice issues, as well as the environmental justice issues, access to clean air, clean water. You'll see all of those up there, food security, access to open space and trees, but also making sure that we're avoiding putting people in harm's way, making sure that they're not putting in floodplains, so making sure they're protected from natural hazards. This climate change, the climate justice issue fits right in here with the discussion we're having today, as well as making sure that our communities are sustainable and resilient. So there's a critical need to work on these simultaneously. So Aziz is going to talk about that. And then we're going to get into two challenges: the economics of housing, and also land use regulations, and because we hear a lot about that. And historically, these issues have resulted in sprawl development that hurts both urban and rural communities and is neither affordable nor sustainable. So how do we address that? What tools do we need to get housing done right? And I think to steal from Chuck Nice this morning, maybe rather than calling it just sustainable housing, we just need to say woke housing and talk about it. It's like we need housing done right. So what tools do we need? What legislative changes are needed to advance the new economic models, as well as making any appropriate land use changes? So this is where we're going to start, and I'm going to start with Aziz. We've briefly discussed, and I've outlined the intersection of social and environmental justice, but you work on this every single day. So could you please elaborate on this intersection and why you feel it is so important for housing and environmental advocates to work together?
Thank you. I want to give you a little brief history of my own self. Before I took this position with the roundtable, I worked with the New York City Community Garden Coalition in New York City. There's 550 community gardens in New York. Most of them are on city land. And why I'm bringing this up is because there was always a fight. There was always a struggle and always a wedge between keeping the community gardens and building housing. And it wasn't affordable housing necessarily. It was penthouses, and they would say, oh, look across the street, and there's this beautiful community garden across the street. And the developer wanted to take that community garden and build a building on it. So I've invested in trying to find a solution where we keep open space and be able to find an environmentally social justice way of building affordable housing. And, you know, we work with, the roundtable works with workforce development. We try to find a just transition, as you said, to renewable work and renewable jobs and renewable energy. And you can train all the people you want and get all the apprentices you want. And if there's no work, they have no work. But if there is work, there's not enough transportation to get them to work. And if there's not enough transportation to get them to work, if they're not working living in New London or New Haven or one of the big cities, they have to live outside. And even that is not affordable. And that's a problem here. That's where we're talking about environmental and social justice as I see it. Because again, if you're going to have to couch surf for 3 years in order to get what's called a sustainable job, that's not really sustainable. And so I think that's part of how we have to view the environmental justice and social justice part of housing. And we also have to realize, and this makes me a little bit crazy in Connecticut, is it seems like we can cite an Amazon warehouse quicker than we can cite housing. And how is that happening, right? How is it that nobody seems to care about the Amazon warehouse, where if we had put housing out there, how many people would we house? So there's this piece that I think is really important. And the last piece is, well, it's certainly not the last piece, because you two have quite a bit to say about it, but we need to make sure that the open space that we preserve is, how am I going to say this, is good open space. It's not crap. It's not next to a coal facility. It's not next to a waste facility. It's in a place where everybody wants to live. I'll also tell you something else. When I was a kid, 17,000 years ago, I was on my local planning board in New Jersey, and we tried to do affordable housing in a rural town in New Jersey. And everybody came to that meeting and said, oh, we don't want those people here. Excuse me? Those people that were able to get affordable housing were policemen, were the sanitation people. They're you and me. And I was never asked back to the planning board after that. And I take that as a badge of honor. And I'm going to continue to be not asked back to different things, because that's what we have to do. I'm done.
Aziz, I think you lead us right into the next discussion, because I think that's one of the things as environmental advocates are going to talk with Eleni. I want to say it again, Eleni. There you go. I get it right. About land use regulations, because how do we as environmental advocates and environmental justice advocates make sure we have strong environmental regulations that work with us, for us, but that we make sure that we don't, have a NIMBY problem. So that's the next question. And we're going to say our land use laws have been put in place to protect us, to protect the public trust, guard our health, safety, and welfare. That's the charge of zoning. Zoning separates out industrial uses from residential uses, for example, and wetland regulations protect us from floodplains. As the chair of planning and development, your committee focuses on the land use process. What legislative changes are you looking at to tackle the housing crisis that addresses the problem of sprawl and supports environmental justice standards? So, for example, you're looking at transit-oriented development, smart growth. What do you see?
So to answer the why can we cite an Amazon warehouse faster? Because we have 169 towns. That's why. I think county government would have slowed that down a little bit, but it is very difficult with 169 towns who say that they all have competing and never overlapping agendas for their local housing. That is a significant part of that problem. I know we don't have a lot of time, so I will do this as fast as I can. But number one, yes, we are bringing back the transit-oriented development bill that did pass with 90 votes in the House last year, also colloquially known as Work, Live, Ride. I really appreciate, and I know that CTLCV was on board with the bill last year because the proponents of the bill, including myself, we took a lot of feedback. One of the other bills that I put forward last year was actually training for the inland wetlands commissions in towns, not just for the person who is the chair of that commission, but for the entire commission. And that is because we already have the training. It's already in place, so it's not going to cost a lot more money. And that's because, unfortunately, and fortunately, we have volunteers who make up our inland wetlands commission. Some towns are very lucky and they have people who really know a lot about inland wetlands, and some towns are not as lucky. And decisions are not being made in a way that, is necessarily smart. I also think that when we keep talking about these flood maps, we're about to get those brand new FEMA maps, which are going to be really important as we move forward, because I think we are currently building in places that we should not be building. And that's not because inland wetlands commissioners are making necessarily bad choices. It's because they're working with outdated information. Obviously, GIS is going to figure into this. There's a lot of pieces that are going to figure into this. But in terms of making sure that we're doing things more equitably, and I agree with you, the last thing we need is a park next to a trash plant or whatever it might be. We need to be thinking about density that makes sense. Obviously, not all transit-oriented development is going to be possible. We have train stations in Connecticut that are frankly very wet. We're not going to be building a lot of dense transit-oriented development there. But we do have parking mandates that are utterly ridiculous that we could be getting rid of. We do have minimum lot sizes that are utterly ridiculous that we could be getting rid of. And if we're talking about inland wetlands commissions, we could be thinking about, single family homes take up a lot more sewer, wastewater, et cetera, in many cases than if we put in a nice multifamily on the same spot that could house more people, but we would have more open space because we're putting them in a smaller spot. I think that these are all things that we're going to be talking about. You may be aware 5002 this year is a housing and homelessness priority bill. I am heavily focused in my mission at the legislature on ensuring that we don't leave anyone outside. I think we all had an unpleasant walk in here today. So when we are talking about justice, we need to be really focused on making sure that we have transitional housing available, that we are able to get people out of the homeless shelter they're in while they're working 2 jobs and their voucher expires while they're sitting in that homeless shelter because we do not have enough housing to transition them to. That doesn't always fall under my purview, but sometimes I drive the bus like it's stolen and we move forward. I'm trying to think. Did I answer? Did I answer enough of that question for you?
Yeah, you did a good job, and I love having worked in land use planning. I supported and worked with folks with the league on the transit-oriented development. So love that, and love the idea of thinking about those of us who worked in land use planning, cluster zoning, which really got a bad rap. It's low impact, sustainable, smart growth. We need to be thinking about the principles that we all learned all know work, and how do we bring this to housing?
And I will tell you from talking to many planners across the state, they are much more forward thinking. And I'm not going to be using woke housing with my colleagues so as not to trigger people into more NIMBYism. But I will say this, I think that it's important that we are listening to the people who actually went to school for this, who are trying to make our communities better instead of having, other thoughts that are not exactly beneficial to our communities, because we are killing our communities by preventing any sort of forward growth. We are really harming ourselves. And to the point of not wanting those people to come live there, I'll just quick personal anecdote. If it weren't for townhouses in the 1980s in the Northern Virginia area, my parents divorced right away after I was born, and was not my fault. There may have been colic. I'm just saying it wasn't me. But having said that, we had to live temporarily with my grandparents for 8 years. And if it were not for brand new townhouses that were being built that my mom could afford, we might not have ever not lived with my grandparents. So when we're thinking about those people, I'm those people. I was those people. My mom was those people. And again, our teachers, our firefighters, my opponent actually held a town hall, and somebody stood up and said, well, where are our police officers and our firefighters and our teachers supposed to live? I represent Avon and Canton. And someone in the audience said, let them go to Plainville. And what's wrong with Plainville? But also, I'd like my firefighters to live in my town so they could actually respond to the fires when we need them. So this is very personal for me and for a lot of my colleagues at the legislature. And we need your support all the time. Please come testify in front of the Planning and Development Committee with your positive, forward-thinking strategies.
Thank you. So we know land use is a big part of it, whether we're talking about zoning or inland wetlands. But the other huge piece of housing, as we said, we talked about energy being complex. The housing issue is complex, and the economic piece of that is really important as well. So Bryan, this question is going to be directed at you. The Green Bank has been a leader in socially responsible investing. Can you provide us some insight on how this could be used to ensure that affordable housing meets environmental justice standards? We've heard like, oh, we can't put solar on affordable housing because it costs too much. So how do we make sure they have access to clean energy efficiency? How do we make sure they have access to open space in the parks we've talked about? And how do we make sure that they're resilient? Because I know the Green Bank has gotten into those other climate issues, not just the energy. So if you could talk about what you see, what you're doing, and also, are there legislative changes we need that could help the Green Bank do a better job?
Great. Well, great question, because it tees up me to be able to talk about both clean energy and parks. I want to kind of end with parks. It may seem a bit different than what we typically talk about, but I wanted to start off with a few key public policy definitions for justice. I really wanted to commend Alex for his session that he coordinated upstairs with Andre on the history of environmental justice in this state. Our definition of environmental justice resides within our 22A-20A statute. I think many of us know what that definition is. It really was expanded upon as a result of Tropical Storm Isaias in the fall of 2020. You all might recall the special session that was held, and Special Act 20-05 was passed, colloquially known as the Take Back Our Grid Act, right? Because hundreds of thousands of households were without power for weeks at a time. And there were a couple of key definitions in there that were very justice related. Obviously, the definition of resilience was built in there. How do you prepare for, respond to, and react from, an issue of climatic impact? But also the definition of vulnerable communities was included. So vulnerable communities has 4 different definitions to it. It deals with low to moderate income communities. That's generally less than 100% area median income census tracts. It includes environmental justice communities, as we talked about upstairs. It includes deep coordinating a process with stakeholders to identify what a vulnerable community is. The one part of the definition that the Green Bank really leans into is the Community Reinvestment Act eligible communities. So CRA, for those of you who know, we are honoring our late President Jimmy Carter this week, passed and signed into law in 1977, the CRA statute, which requires federal depository institutions to invest in less than 80% area median income census tracts. So they are, given the correlation between income and ethnicity, the kind of tool that we have. So one of the things that you said upstairs, Denise, on environmental justice really caught me, which was when we think about our environmental justice statutes, it's really about preventing these facilities from being developed. How do we think about these definitions in terms of increasing access to clean energy and increasing access to parks? So we really lean into that. When that statute passed in 2020, in January of 2021, our board essentially approved of the Green Bank staff and our comprehensive plan of setting a target. So we became very active and said, okay, by 2025, no less than 40% of investment is going to go to vulnerable communities. We are at 50%. So we're going to continue to do what we do to attract private investment in these communities. Our vision is a planet protected by the love of humanity. We can't have environmentalism without humanitarianism. We have to love each other first in order for us to really get by what we need to lean into. So we wanted to start with those definitions. The second part is what clean energy policies exist for housing. We've heard several of them throughout the course of the day. Our residential solar market is doing very, very well. We've had policies over the years that have encouraged large-scale deployment. We changed that policy in 2019. We now have the Residential Renewable Energy Solutions Program that is being implemented by our utilities, and we're kicking butt. We're deploying over 100 megawatts a year in residential rooftop solar. That is going into, as I look at the data, vulnerable communities as well, on par as non-vulnerable communities. Yes, as the market grows, we're going to see consumer protection issues, so we're going to need to address those. But the market is doing very, very well. We've seen Chair Gillette, as her team looks to set the rules, make sure that there are targets for vulnerable communities in those programs for the administrators. We also have storage programs. So in 2021, Public Act 53 was passed that essentially set a 1,000 megawatt battery storage target. Chair Gillette, in the PURA docket, we co-administer this program with the utilities, really set targets and increase incentives for distressed, vulnerable communities through that program. But I think the most key policy that was passed in 2021, there were several bills. We heard Mark earlier talk about 2021 as a flat year. I actually think one of the most impactful environmental justice bills addressing affordable housing was passed in 2021. And that was a result of Senator Lopes passing Section 2 underneath Public Act 21-48, which essentially allows multifamily affordable housing to be treated in the Residential Renewable Energy Solutions Program. Like, who would have thought that multifamily would be treated as a commercial property as opposed to a residential program? Well, Senator Lopes made that bill happen. It took several years for PURA to run a fantastic process. DEEP, the Department of Housing, Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, ourselves, HUD, very actively involved in trying to determine what affordable housing means. There are several definitions for that. Essentially, if you are a property that has received state support, and there are 12 to 1,300 of them, representing some 80 to 90,000 tenants, about 40% of our low-income tenants, then you are deemed affordable housing. So we now have a market, we now have a target to go after. Somebody in the prior panel talked about I think it was Charles, the levelized cost of energy. We can deploy carports in affordable housing facilities today now, given the structure of how this program works. So I am really, really excited to see this program that's going to really bring tenants into energy affordability and savings as a result of the passage of this policy. We've got a program called Solar Map for affordable housing that we're rolling out, where we provide technical assistance and financial assistance to make sure that those projects get deployed. We just ran an RFP. We're going to see some pricing coming in a second, but we're going to see a lot of the tenants within those facilities be able to save on their energy. In terms of access to parks, just a quick point. Hartford, as we all heard and know, is kind of the self-proclaimed insurance capital of the world. We're also the birthplace and burial place of Frederick Law Olmsted. We need to build on our No Child Left Inside, our Passport to Parks policy, and begin looking at park prescriptions. We know that from a public health perspective, parks and green spaces heal. So we need to be looking at them as assets to heal. How can we think about and reward our healthcare industry for investing in the modernization of our parks? Resilience, look at the Meriden Green, probably the biggest example of how to look at a park, not only creating local economic development, but again, solving the pollution, the solution of flooding that goes on in Meriden. How can we reward our insurance industry to invest in parks, right? So we come with the lens of how can we bring industry investment into the social and environmental outcomes that we want to see happen. And your last question on what policies do you want to see? We want to see SB 11 passed. SB 11 single-handedly we think is going to attract and mobilize significant amounts of private investment in our communities.
Thank you, Bryan. And I love the idea of looking at the insurance, because that's one of the things people are talking about. But not only the insurers from that public health, as well as responding to climate change. So because I think it's really, really important that we do have people who can invest in what we need to have done. So here's a question for any of the panelists. And it gets back into that regulatory piece a little bit, because we do need environmental regulations. And during the last Trump administration, we saw rollbacks of environmental regulations, and in particular to the wetland section of the Clean Water Act. So we are really concerned about that. And environmental advocates really want to make sure that we use our strong regulations we have here in Connecticut and protect them. So how do we make sure that we have these in place, that we're doing it right, but that we're also then, making sure that we're not using them, to limit affordable housing, but actually make sure that we're doing affordable housing that has these protections that these environmental regulations, whether it be the Clean Air Act or the Clean Water Act, provide for us, as well as our state regulations. So anyone want to jump on this? Yeah.
It's me. Okay.
Well, you started a little bit with talking about training for wetland commissioners.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's really important that we have people who, I'll just give you an example. Part of what we are in charge of on the Planning and Development Committee is the State Plan of Conservation and Development. And many of our towns sort of use that as a guiding light for what they're doing. And recently, and this is public record, so I'm not speaking out of school. Unfortunately, I chair that subcommittee of the Planning and Development, the Continuing Committee on Connecticut's Development and Futures, and we don't have a lot of the committee that shows up anymore. And we've just received a draft proposal of this. We're going to have a public hearing on the state plan. And our majority leader, Representative Rojas, made the comment that it's going to be controversial that climate change is at the center of our state plan of conservation and development. Equity is also throughout the bill, throughout the plan. So I actually think that's going to be a heavier lift. But think about the fact of the numbers we just saw in that last presentation, because we know that your zip code does determine your health outcomes. But think about those maps and all of that, frankly, depressing information, and that we would even have to argue over climate change being the centerpiece of that. And so in terms of affordable housing, we're fighting on multiple fronts. It's not just that people don't want it in their towns. Then on top of it, we're going to add some sort of environmental requirements. And in some ways, that's excellent and we have to do that. And then in other ways, we have people who aren't even willing to acknowledge the fact that we need these environmental protections in order to make our world a better place. We see projects turned down because of a variety of reasons, but it really is depressing to me. I won't name the developer, but there's a developer who's bringing in, these really great, efficient buildings that are wonderful, that have solar panels that, if you put up the window, it either shuts off your heat or your air conditioning if you're not paying attention to what's still on. They're smaller, the footprint is smaller, all of these good things, and yet the towns reject them. So I think that, I am so appreciative of the fact that you stayed all day and for this, I believe, the final panel, but we really need you in our communities to be helping us because this is going to be a long 4 years. And for those of us who care about the environment, we as legislators cannot do it alone. Obviously, we're in the rooms where decisions are being made, but that's why it's so exciting to see all the young people here today because we need your testimony. We need you to show up. We need you on the rope line tomorrow. All of these things, because I will say, and I think I can speak for my beloved colleague, Representative Parker, we don't get enough emails from people who actually want us to do things in a positive way about affordable housing and environmental justice.
And I think that's the charge. I mean, if we take anything away from this, this is what we want. We need to make sure people understand that environmental advocates are also affordable housing. We are for social justice. We are for economic justice. We are for environmental justice. It's who the people who work in the environment are, and how do we make sure that that voice is loud and clear. So,
and I would just say, and also that we are not over talking people who live in those environmentally justice challenged communities, because you may have noticed I'm really white looking.
Yeah.
So
well, you may
I just think it's important for us to also recognize that we should not be making decisions for people without those people involved in those conversations.
Absolutely.
Good point.
So I just want to talk a little bit about, just because we only have a few more minutes, some of the other solutions, and Bryan, talked about, some of the economic things we have, really bringing clean energy and energy efficiency, into housing. But we have some other models. Because economics is a main driver of housing supply, community land trusts, that model, and it's being used successfully in southeastern Connecticut. It can be adopted for both urban and rural landscapes. The model that makes affordable houses, this particular model, if you're not familiar with it, makes housing affordable because the community land trust owns the land, which is often the most expensive part of ownership. But also benefit corporations. Benefit corporations are private. We see private development. That's really who drives our housing market. But using benefit corporations, would this be a way of getting that socially responsible investing? So just wanted to throw out, how do we see using some different economic models? Because yes, we need to change the land use regulations, but if we don't have the economic models, that's not going to matter, because it's economics that's going to drive this. So just wondering if you have any comments about using that community land trust model and the benefit corporations. And now, Bryan, you have some experience with the benefit model.
Yeah. You had asked about benefit corporations, and I took a look at our policies here in the state. We have a policy that passed in 2014 that allows corporations to seek from our Secretary of State Thomas a designation for benefit corporations. And you could think about companies that are, yes, profit driven, but they are social and environmentally minded, or driven by their employees' desire to lift their employees up. So there are some foundations for B Corps in our state. Just to give you a few examples of Bigelow Tea at a Fairfield. So by Bigelow Tea, Blue Earth Compost here in Hartford. You could become a member of Blue Earth. Hugo and Hobie in New Haven, we buy furniture at our office from them. They use the reclaimed woods. So those are just a few examples of some benefit corporations. But we also work with some national benefit corporations. So we work with Amalgamated Bank. They are the first and largest labor-backed, union-backed financial institution in the country. We were hearing earlier about the Small Business Energy Advantage program supporting our faith-based institutions. Eversource has a fantastic program, on bill 0%. The way that program works in terms of the capital requirements is the Green Bank goes out to the market to find low-cost capital to support the program. Amalgamated Bank is our partner. So they've provided over $100 million of financing for over 7,500 of those small businesses here in our state. So they are a benefit corporation. We also tie that program to our Green Liberty Notes. Is anybody here familiar with our Green Liberty Notes? So the Green Bank holds a portion of those small business loans. In a few weeks, we're going to be issuing our, 14th Green Liberty Note offering where you can put $100 out there. These are one-year notes. They're better than CDs, but the proceeds go to supporting small business energy efficiency, like those faith-based churches that we saw with Amalgamated Bank. We also work with Posigen. Posigen is also a B Corp. They provide solar energy efficiency and storage solutions with a focus on vulnerable communities. We specifically had a Solar for All campaign with them where they supported 4,500 homes. And if you look at their data, overwhelmingly in vulnerable communities, Black and Hispanic communities are benefiting from solar deployment. I get to the privilege of looking at meters and utility bills and contracts, and I can see that those homes are saving between $600 to $1,200 a year in avoided energy costs. So when energy prices go up, the most vulnerable are able to push against those rising energy costs, and we want to make sure all of that happens. So there are some great benefit corporations out there that we can bring capital into Connecticut to make clean energy more affordable and accessible for our families.
Thank you. And I think we're going to wrap it up. So again, thank you to our panelists. Thank you to the League for having us. Our message is, clean energy, energy efficiency, bringing it to affordable housing and making sure that we're talking with one voice when we talk about the environment and affordable housing. So thank you.